letter, and I'm going to show you examples of this. This is a partial printout from an analysis that we use. This is a printout from a program called Encase, which is a computer software program they used to look at hard drives. And in that, we looked at all the 293 files. The file name is given here. You see they're all different. The creation date is all different. And these are the hash values. Hash value is a measure of a particular file. You can get a hash value for almost anything digital. It could be a single file. It could be a whole hard drive. But in this case, we have hash values for the individual files. And I can tell you that when you open up a file with a given hash value and you remove a word and put the word right back in, the new hash value is going to be different. So these files are absolutely identical in content, but they have different dates and different names. And what's interesting is the dates and names are consistent with when Dr. Thara Shelvin was writing her papers and submitting grant applications. But these files are identical. And out of the 293, about, 20 or 25% fell into groups of identical files. So that's a problem. I mean, she may have done this data, but the problem is that these data were corrupted and they couldn't be read. They're done by a particular proprietary software program that the stereology laboratory and facility, the equipment uses. So they actually went to the company and they said, yes, there are files, but we can't read them because they're corrupted. So out of the 8 potential findings, or the 8 complaints, the university is only able to make one finding of misconduct. But in their process of their investigation, they found a couple of additional problems. Well, I guess, okay. I've already said this. I'll give you a second to look at it. Well, I guess, all right. I took out the other 2 things. There's a false letter and whatever, but I'm going to make sure the time is good. So there was a fabricated letter that she wrote based on a letterhead from her doctor when she lived in Rochester. And in that letter, she had taken the letterhead and written a new letter with it. And it had, in the bottom, it had the footnote, had the phone number for the doctor's office and everything else. But the letter had no signature. Thank you. I think we're okay. And she had written a letter saying that she had cancer. She had treatment for cancer, therefore wouldn't be able to participate in the investigative process. Well, she didn't have cancer. The letter was fabricated. And the reason they know it's fabricated was 2. The doctor didn't sign it. And number 2, and more importantly, the phone number in the bottom of the letter was area code 716. That's the area code for Buffalo, New York, and it had been the area code for Rochester. But as of 2008 or 2007, something like that, Rochester's area code changed from 716 to 585 or something like that. So she'd used a letter that was very old to fabricate a letter. And she had a witness that she said had done the stereology work for her, and that witness was a false witness. Turns out ORI was responsible for uncovering that problem as well. So, actually I do have this, sorry. Well, here's the false witness. And we called the lab where the witness had originally lived, and she was still there. So having moved to London turned out to be false. The fabricated doctor's letter. This is the area code 716. And it was changed in 2001, it turns out. So the consequences are that Dr. Thara Shelvin, she had already resigned. She agreed to a 7-year debarment from receiving grants and retraction of 2 papers. The bottom line is important to require everyone keeping original data. this case, it was still original, but we had to get Micro Brightfield to actually decode, and they were able to say that all those files were, I didn't get to that. That far got lost. All the files, all 293 files came from one file dating back to when she was at Rochester. So she made up all the entire file structure. So Dr. Paulman was a long-term misconduct case. He ended up going to jail, very rare case. Professor of medicine at the University of Vermont. He supposedly collected data from hundreds of volunteers in a longitudinal study of aging. And in 2000, a technician allegedly had falsified data. Vermont did an outstanding investigation. The inquiry committee uncovered additional problems with multiple papers and many grant applications. All the clinical data had been in spreadsheets, and comparison of early and late versions of the spreadsheet showed many discrepancies in particular fields on the spreadsheet, but not in others. And the institution report made 30 findings of misconduct. So the investigation by ORI, we reviewed additional NIH grant applications, and we made 56 findings of misconduct and recommended retraction of 10 papers. This is an example of some of his falsified data. This is the original data. TE1 means visit 1. TE2 is total energy expenditure. It's a measure of metabolism. These are just first names of some of the subjects. There were many more. And these are data from visit 2. TE2 is about 6 years later. You see that in this measure, there are many measures not made. They're blank. Whereas they're made here, and they're coded blue so it's easy to read. These are fabricated numbers. And then when he didn't agree with the trend, he reversed them. So that's a double falsification. So the falsification is in red, and fabrication is in blue. And his data was full of these discrepancies. Another example is with glucose, where kind of surprisingly, the trend in his subjects in Vermont was that even though you'd expect the opposite, glucose levels tended to go down between the 6 years between visit 1 minute, perhaps 2 minutes. And these are all double reversals. Falsified data on aging and on lipid and in lipid metabolism. He falsified hormone replacement therapy, effects on menopause transition, effects on endurance training, and Alzheimer's disease. And the Justice Department took over, and they determined that criminal and civil charges were warranted. And so at the end of the day, he pled guilty to a felony charge, a civil settlement of $196,000 that he paid himself, debarred for life, and he requested retraction of the papers. Consequences: he had resigned. Junior colleagues and institutional reputations damaged. Volunteers in Vermont were upset, of course. Money on the NIH grants were wasted, affected public health, erosion of public trust in science. Bottom line is, committed cheater can elude detection for years by playing on the trust and the self-interest of his or her colleagues, New York Times. So the outcome of the institutional ORI investigations is to assign responsibility personally for the persons actually committing misconduct, determine if the PI knew of RM or created a culture where RM was widespread in his or her lab, recommend demand proper paper retractions, can't demand, as I mentioned earlier. Sanctions include the supervision while supported by PHS funding, and rarely recovery of funds. And so the conclusions for this talk As a research misconduct occurs at all major research institutions and countries, it should be dealt with promptly, objectively, confidentially, and fairly. And moving forward, use of forensic software for detecting inappropriate image manipulation and plagiarism, enhanced education on responsible conduct of research, and establishment of adequate procedures to handle possible research misconduct. Thank you.
Thank you for the second talk on the some cases, how you handle those misconducts and the consequences of them. We have about 20 minutes, 15 minutes for Q&A. Any questions from the audience here? Well, could I ask a question? Since the ORI established, in terms of the frequencies or the cases of misconduct, has it decreased?
It's the actual,
in other words, is it an effect?
I think there's an upward trend because we're detecting more cases of falsification, but there's a lag in terms of moving from that to making findings of misconduct. Right. And our office is so small that the number of findings that we make is limited by resources as much as anything else. Hopefully, the new director and others, parts of the department will see the wisdom of increasing the staff at ORI and making more findings. It's certainly warranted.
There are a number of issues that are pretty difficult to deal with. For example, in terms of co-authorships, I mean, in terms of responsibilities.
That's right.
What's your view at ORI? Suppose there's a paper of 3 or 4 labs collaborations, and one of the lab principal investigator is involved, probably some misconduct. Then what do you do in terms of the other co-PIs? Are they also responsible for that, or they are?
No. What we typically have recommended over the years is that if an allegation is made about a particular portion of a paper, say a figure 6, is that, and the allegations can be made against anybody in that. It depends on where the allegations come from. If it's anonymous, it's not clear. Usually, the first author will be responsible for most of the data, not all of it. Sometimes the part of the data will be identified in a note. But we recommend that the institution who's responsible for publishing the paper start by asking the corresponding author who is responsible for each figure, who is responsible for the data, and if they can identify quickly who was responsible for the question figure, and there's no other evidence of problems in other figures, then that's how you focus the investigation on the person who was responsible for the figure. There are obviously can be complicating factors. The person who made the figure may claim that somebody else made the figure, or he did the gel, but someone else made the figure. So all that has to be straightened out. But only the people who knowingly committed the falsifications or fabrication are held responsible for misconduct by ORI.
Any other questions? Yes?
The preservation of experimental data seems been quite important, okay? But there are so many authors, co-authors for paper, okay, current time, okay. So is there any guideline from ORI on how to preserve raw data for example, for some kind of project with so many PI or co-PIs?
Unfortunately, there is not. NIH is responsible for awarding the grants, and NIH actually has a grant data retention policy that the